Dear friends, Namaste and welcome to this special session of She and Rights to mark the global observance of International Day of Zero Tolerance for Female Genital Mutilation or Cutting and ahead of the 70th UN Commission on Status of Women or CSW 70, which will open soon next month. This session will also focus on the recent ruling of Supreme Court of India that reinforces menstrual hygiene as a fundamental right. We will also share outcomes of a community-led intervention to find breast cancer early with linkage to treatment, care and support. This She and Right session is together hosted by Global Center for Health Diplomacy and Inclusion, SEHDI, Women Deliver Conference 2026, International Planned Parenthood Federation or IPPF, Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women or ARROW, Women's Global Network for Reproductive Rights or WGNRR, Asia Pacific Media Alliance for Health, Gender and Development Justice or APCAT Media, and CNS. For those who are not aware, the third edition of She and Rights Media Awards 2026 was announced in December 2025. Journalists reporting on issues raised in She and Rights sessions are welcome to apply. The award ceremony would be held around Women Deliver Conference 2026 in Melbourne, Australia. The link to apply for these awards is in the chat box. We are proud to share that CNS is an official media partner of Women Deliver Conference 2026. A few quick housekeeping announcements before we begin. Participants can please type in their questions and comments in the chat box, even as the speakers present. We will take up as many relevant questions as time permits after all speakers have presented. Dear friends, when we speak about violence and human rights violations, female genital mutilation or cutting is perhaps amongst the most heinous of crimes. At the UN General Assembly 2015, world leaders had globally promised to end female genital mutilation or cutting by 2030. But despite such promises, the FGM rates have instead increased by 15% in the past 8 years, from 200 million in 2016 to over 230 million in 2024. According to the WHO, the practice of female genital mutilation or cutting is recognized internationally as a violation of human rights of girls and women. Today's session also marks 20th anniversary of Universal Periodic Review or UPR. FGM is also one of the indicators for UPR. Let us make our accountability mechanisms like UPR more effective in ensuring that gender equality and human right to health are protected and guaranteed to every person, leaving no one behind. Without any further ado, let us open today's session with the powerful voice of an inspiring change maker, Catherine Menganyi, who serves as a nurse in Kenya and helps care for people and save lives. She herself is a survivor of FGM and a fierce advocate to end FGM as well as all forms of gender based violence. Catherine has also been conferred with the Head of State Commendation Honor by the President of Kenya. She is unable to join us online due to a conflicting schedule, but has shared her message with us. Let us hear to what she says.
So thank you so much for having me here today. And it's so humbling to pick up this conversation at the best time forward when we are commemorating the International Day of Zero Tolerance against Female Genital Mutilation. My name is Catherine Chacha Menganyi. I'm a nurse, epidemiologist. I work in Kenya. I currently coordinate gender-based violence prevention and response in one of the sub-nationals called Migori. And I am also the co-founder and chapter lead of Women in Global Health Kenya, an organization that fights for the rights of gender equity in health, among other things, gender-based violence, but ensuring that women and girls are protected. Other than that, I'm passionate about advocating against gender-based violence, And to pick up this conversation for today, my journey on ending female genital mutilation did not begin in an office. So that's why I usually say it's all about the community. It's all about us. As a survivor of FGM, so my journey began when I knew where the shoe hurts most. So speaking from a perspective of experience, perspective of pain, today is a very important day where we need to ask ourselves, where do we come in this conversation of ending female genital mutilation, especially in this time and era where it's supposed to end? Some years back, when Catherine was a very young girl, was subjected to medicalized FGM, and that was the first and turning point of life because the pain is usually very clear at times. The psychosocial trauma is very, very clear to my head. But now I take it like it's an opportunity now to save the more than 1,000 girls that I've known that have passed through my hand and never underwent the cut. So that has been amazing because one, I appreciate that the communities have their cultural norms, but now where do we move in when it comes to violence against women and girls? So it's not about sitting in the comfort zone. So I have been very categorical in looking at my space. One, being a survivor, two, being a nurse, because I know the effects that will come in my workplace. And then coming from a community where this is a topic that sometimes feels like it's not spoken of. So this has really strengthened my journey to speak up, save girls, and reach out to everyone because one, FGM can only end if the community themselves pick up the responsibility of protecting girls and women without getting issues to justify why violence should be done. My main message for international zero tolerance for FGM is this should not only be a calendar event. And I always feel bad at times when each year I ask myself, as we commemorate these days, what have we created as impact in the community? Are we celebrating a day that it has to pass? Or are we asking ourselves, what have we done? So it's a reminder of the million of girls and women who have been at risk of FGM or who have undergone FGM because we still have the survivors to look at. And that tells me that silence, delays, and weak commitment are causing the violence against women and girls in the world. So this is a day to sit down again and reflect. What have we done well? As we all know right now, we are looking at ending FGM by 2030. We need to ask ourselves, is it a reality or it's written in books? Can we come out now and say we need to call it as it is and mention it as it is and get all the players to come into place? So this day, I call out for key things that need to be done. I know all over the world we'll get speeches from the government, we'll get speeches from CSOs, we'll get speeches from non-governmental organizations. Some people will also give opportunity for survivors to talk about it. But now we need to call out, we need to move down out from the day itself and now create action. One of the things is we need to have budget allocation for prevention of FGM because it is really, we cannot run away from discussing violence against children. And it can only be done if we get support at the correct place and the correct way to be done it. Then we need to clearly put up protection systems that actually reach the girls. I recently worked closely on, I come from a community where FGM is practiced, and I was very keen at how are the girls speaking out. So it was so frustrating when you get girls running away from their homes because they are at risk of undergoing FGM. So where do we call safe? A safe place should be at home, where everybody is friendly and the rest. But now we are turning our homes to be unsafe. So the conversation is, how do we change this narrative? Many countries have laws, have enforced their laws on harming children. But now, do we go back and ask if these laws are being taken care of? As much as there are laws there, but the practice is still there, that clearly shows that, can we revise our laws? Is it because our laws are weak? Or something needs to be done to ensure that justice is gotten for the women and girls undergoing violence? Then we need to invest in community-led solutions. I have always believed in community-owned solutions or community-led solutions because Sociocultural issues are more impacted at the communities. These communities understand why they're practicing this. These communities understand why they're keeping into it. So can we have a strong system that is community-led, a strong system that the community picks up, and they're the first people to pick up this conversation? Because once we have community-led solutions, it's very easy for them to bring up issues and get solutions and understand the vices that they're causing. So good to invest on community-led solutions. As we still speak and end this, one interesting bit is violence against women and girls is not only female genital mutilation. So FGM does not exist in isolation. It is part of a wider system that controls girls, women and girls' bodies. It limits the choices of women and girls, and this brings normalization of violence. So we cannot delink FGM from the bigger picture of violence against women and girls. So we need to emphasize the importance of gender equality, gender equity. It is not optional, it has to work. The conversation of putting women, understanding women, putting them at the decision-making table, listening to their voices, very critical, because as much as they undergo violence, they have a voice to speak in it and they have a voice to change. Then it is a foundational to health, education, and peace. So putting up interventions that end violence against women and girls is a plus to all the country. It's a plus to the world, because it gives an opportunity for health to thrive, because most of the indicators that will even affect women and girls, you can always delink them to the intersectionality of violence coming in. So this conversation has to be taken up, and it will ensure that education and peace is very critical factor. Then protecting the girls, as it's always said, protecting women and girls is like protecting the entire generations. So we cannot run away from these facts, and we really need to look at it in a very positive and in a very focused way. As today I think through and want to end this and celebrate with all of us, celebrate our wins, put up structures, put up key facts, key way forwards, and key asks on what to do, I will really think about this should be a message of hope. Hope to the survivors of FGM, hope to the women who really struggle to protect their young girls, but they never managed. Hope to the fathers who really tried to protect their young girls, but they never managed. But above all, hope to the girls who did not manage to get protected, but they really wish to be protected. So to me, I would want the world we want for women and girls it will not be given to us, but we need to work through and get it. One, it can be through policies and community own-led interventions. So as I end this day, one great quote for me is, every girl, every woman has the right to grow up whole, safe, educated, and free from violence. Ending female genital mutilation is not charity, it is justice. So today, as we pick up this conversation, let us be positive, knowing that we have a role to play and we can do it. It's very great to be in this space, be in this conversation. And I believe that this is not about the day, it's about coming out, speaking out, holding each other's hands, and believing in our vision 2030 in ending female genital mutilation. Thank you so much, and we hope to catch up and continue with the conversation.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for your powerful words and the commendable work you are doing to end FGM, and also stressing upon the importance of community led solutions. Now, I would like to invite my friend Safiya Riyaz from Sri Lanka, who is mobilizing a regional united call in Asia to end FGM. Safiya serves as Program Officer at ARROW, that is the Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women. ARROW is among the co hosts of She and Rights since its inception, and also part of Asia Network to End FGM. Welcome, Safiya, and over to you.
Thanks, Shobha. And first of all, thanks for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to contribute to this very important discussion, especially today as we mark the International Day of Zero Tolerance for FGMC. And I've been tasked with contextualizing the concern of FGMC within the Asian region, which is something that is usually quite invisible. And sometimes many people don't know that it's actually happening in Asia and in Southeast Asia and South Asia. I've prepared a few slides, which I'm just going to share so that it's easy for people to follow along. Um, so just a brief introduction, as Shobha mentioned, I'm a program officer at Arrow, and I'm based in Colombo in Sri Lanka, and I coordinate work around female genital mutilation and cutting in the Asian region, and also coordinate the Asian Network to End FGMC, which is a group of civil society organizations and actors from across Asia who have been working on calling for an end to FGMC within the region, both regionally but also nationally. So just to kind of give a very brief overview, assuming that a few of us were joining don't really have an idea of what FGMC is. So female genital mutilation or cutting is described by the World Health Organization as all procedures that involve partial or total removal of the external female genitalia or other injury to the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. Now, this is sometimes known using other words in Asia, such as sunnat, khatna, female circumcision, and various others. But I think the important distinction to be made here is that no matter what terminology we're using, it is recognized internationally as a grave violation of human and child rights, particularly sexual and reproductive health and rights of girls and women, and as a form of gender-based violence. And that's how we should frame it. And emphasis here on violation of child rights is because even in Asia, and we see this globally as well, we know that the practice is performed on young babies and girls, right, between right after they're born to 5 years of age. And that's a predominant form of the practice. So it's very important for us to wrap our head around the form in which it's happening and to whom it is happening. So and if you're looking at the practice, it usually falls into four broad categories. We have type 1, which is the partial or total removal, type 2, type 3, and type 4. And type 4 usually refers to all harmful procedures that doesn't fall into these categories, like pricking, nicking, scraping, piercing of the female genitalia. So in Asia, what we're seeing, based on what is documented and based on the work of all our national partners, is that type 1 is happening quite a bit, and type 4. So those are what we are predominantly seeing in the region. And again, to contextualize this using numbers, if you look at globally, we know that it's happening to 130 million women and girls, right? But a significant proportion from that, which is 35% of that caseload, is actually lies in Asia. So 80 million girls and women. And again, emphasis on this is based on what we know. There is a lot about this practice that we don't know, especially because it's quite secretive, it's taboo. A lot of the times in Asia, women don't know that it's happened to them until they have a baby girl, and then the conversation comes up, especially because there's a quite taboo nature when it comes to talking about sexuality in women and so on. So we are estimating that this is an underestimation on based on what we know, but that's the data. And we know that in Asia, if you look at this map, we have 13 countries where it's documented. So in South Asia, we have India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Maldives. And in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Brunei, Singapore, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Azerbaijan. So these are the countries where we know documented evidence that it's happening. And a significant burden of that 80 million caseload actually is accounted in Indonesia and Malaysia alone, so 77.5 million. And in South Asia, even though we don't have national prevalence estimation, we have enough anecdotal and small scale studies to say for certain that it's happening in certain communities in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. And again, emphasis that it's happening performed on young girls and infants within the first year after birth or before 5 years of age. And if you look at the legal protections in the region, it's severely inadequate. We have only one country, Indonesia, which has any regulation banning the practice. So that's one big challenge. And the other challenge is the lack of data and understanding, which is what the network and all the network members and all our national partners who've been working on this for a long time, for decades actually, are trying to understand in terms of how the practice has evolved and how it is happening. So if you look at global data, who performs it, right? So globally, we know that for a long time, even regionally, it was traditional practitioners performing FGM. And in Sri Lanka, for example, they're called osteomamas. But then we're seeing a very worrying trend in medicalization, which means that globally and in Asia, more and more healthcare professionals are getting involved in performing the practice. And what's important to remember here is that FGMC has no health or medical benefits and no sound scientific basis as to why a healthcare professional should be engaging in. So that is something that's very important to remember. And this is based on work from our national partners and also network members. So for example, these are some of the knives that are being used, right? Just to understand, and I really put a picture to it, some of the knives that are being used by traditional performers, rusted in many cases, to prick or nick girls, young girls' clitoris. And they're also the medicalization, also that kind of the performance of it is also secretive, but also public in the sense that these are, for example, advertisements that healthcare professionals have put out online. So if you know where to look, you can easily find this information. And in Indonesia and Malaysia, we know that the trend is shifting and that more and more healthcare professionals are getting involved. And the question comes up as to why, right? Why are healthcare professionals engaging in this? And most often it's not because they want to hurt girls. That's not sometimes the case. Sometimes it's a perceived harm reduction where they think if it's done in sterile conditions, that it might actually be safer. But we know that global data does not have any proof to say that by doing it in a medical setting that it makes it safer and that there is health benefits. There's no health benefits, right? So that is one very worrying trend as we're moving towards it. But also, by health professionals kind of performing it, we're wrongly legitimizing this practice as something that is medically sound or beneficial. So that is one thing. And based on data that we're seeing in Malaysia and Singapore, we know that sometimes when healthcare professionals do it, they cut deeper. So this perceived harm reduction theory really falls apart in that case. And there have been very explicit condemnations by medical bodies like WHO and like the International Federation of Gynecology and Obstetrics and the International Confederation of Midwives, UNFPA, against the medicalization of FGM in Asia. And the other question that comes up sometimes when we're doing advocacy in this, and especially when we engage with communities, is that is religiously mandated. Because somewhere along the line, this practice has got associated, right? But then we know that this practice predates any kind of religion, and that we should understand it as a harmful practice and a form of GBV that has become associated with religion. And we know that global bodies and regional religious institutions like Al-Azhar University and national fatwa councils like KUPI in Indonesia have categorically come out and reaffirmed that it is not religiously mandated and have issued statements rejecting it. So we see that in Asia, it's something that's been sustained due to social norms, ideas around purity, that by performing FGM on a girl, somehow they become less promiscuous, right? Marriageability and really boils down to a control of sexuality. And the next discourse that comes up is this notion of risk. Sometimes you see in Asia where proponents or supporters say, no, the form that we're doing is not as bad as what's happening globally. And then they say that there's no real harm associated with it. But then we don't have any kind of proof for that argument to prevail as well. And while the short and long-term effects in Asia is undocumented because of a lack of data, we know that there is a context of information from Asia pointing to possible post-procedural complications such as infections, long-term pain after child delivery, negative impact on women's sex lives, and the emotional impacts and the distress that comes with women realizing that this has been done on them. And we have documented complications of type 1, which is also happening in Asia from other regions, which is a more severe form of it, including pain, genital swelling, hemorrhage, and so on. So coming back to really the key gaps, and I think Catherine also spoke on some of this. One is we have a scarcity of nationally represented data. There is a weak integration into sexual and reproductive health and rights, because sometimes this is seen as an isolated issue, that this is not seen within the wider SRHR discourse that we have. And the other thing is limited funding and limited political attention, which we are seeing from Asian counterparts and states as well, which makes it very challenging to do any kind of advocacy in this area. And the other big thing that I want to emphasize, similar to what Catherine was saying, was that this needs to be a community-led and driven effort, supported by allies, especially in Asia, where we have contexts like India and Sri Lanka, where practicing communities might be from oppressed minority communities, right? So we do not want to pander to any racial framing of this issue, but at the same time, it's a it's a violation of women and girls' rights. So in that sense, it needs to be community-led and driven. But of course, there is a very vital role that allies from outside practicing communities has a role to play, especially when it comes to healthcare professionals, medical bodies, and policymakers. And just as Shobha had previously mentioned, FGMC is something that is condemned by a number of international treaties and conventions, including CRC, CEDAW, UPR, the UN Convention on the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls, which multiple of our states in the Asian region are signatories on. And we have a specific SDG that explicitly calls for an end to FGMC by 2030. But then at the progress that we're kind of making, we need to be at least 27 times faster than it currently is. But that is not to say that there is no movement, right? There is a lot of optimism in terms of how movements have formed within the Asian region and how everybody has mobilized, especially when it comes from survivors and women who have been cut and they're leading the charge. So there is a lot of work that is happening. There is more commitment that we're seeing and more awareness on what the issue is and more kind of debunking of the myths that we're seeing, which is quite hopeful as we kind of move and advocate on a very challenging issue. I think my time is up, so I'm just going to stop my presentation there and over to you, Shobha.
Thank you very much, Safiya, for sharing the situation in Asia, which I think we never thought that it is so much prevalent in Asia, and the lack of legal regulations. And also, you are so right in saying that medicalization of FGM is actually giving it a legitimate stand as a harm reduction activity. So, thank you very much, and I hope we succeed in our mission to eliminate this, what I call a heinous crime against women. Moving forward, I welcome Divya Srinivasan, Global Lead at End Harmful Practices, Equality Now. Divya will share with us highlights of the new Equality Now report. Over to you, Divya.
Thank you so much, Shobha. And I think sort of the conversation's already been well set up by both Catherine and Safia. I wanted to share some of the findings of the new report that Equality Now just launched on 4th of February in advance of Zero Tolerance Day, which is called Towards Justice, Global Challenges and Opportunities in Litigating Cases of Female Genital Mutilation. As you've already heard, FGM affects 230 million women and girls worldwide. And we have research which says that FGM is taking place in at least 94 countries across the world. And of these 94 countries, 59 of them have specific laws which are addressing FGM. Despite this, actual prosecutions and access to justice remains really rare in most of the countries across the world, despite the existence of these anti-FGM laws. So that's why we thought this report was really necessary. Firstly, to examine how strategic litigation has been used across different jurisdictions to really improve accountability and to strengthen the implementation of legal frameworks, but also to look at this critical piece on access to justice and what survivors of FGM have really faced when they have tried to access the justice system and what kind of barriers they've faced. To speak about the first piece in terms of the strategic litigation cases, we came up with 6 case studies of landmark cases on female genital mutilation, which have taken place in a number of different countries across the world, including the United States, Kenya, the Gambia, Liberia, India, and Burkina Faso. And we found that there basically 3 types of strategic litigation that we really analyzed. One is proactive litigation, is when CSOs have, for example, taken governments to court for failure to take action on ending FGM. And one really good example of this here is a judgment from last year from the Economic Community of West African States, the ECOWAS Court of Justice, which found that Sierra Leone was failing to meet its international human rights obligations because it did not have a specific law against FGM. And it ordered the state to take immediate action, including enacting and implementing such legislation and taking comprehensive measures to prohibit its occurrence and protect victims, as well as to provide compensation to the survivor who was the one who took that specific case. The other type of litigation, which we're increasingly seeing in recent years, is what we're calling reactive litigation, where, as part of the anti-rights movement, we've seen in a lot of countries there have been constitutional challenges to anti-FGM laws, which are already in place and existing. And we've seen this in the US, we've seen it in Kenya, and most recently in the Gambia, where the case is still pending. Here, CSOs and survival-led groups are often sucked into litigation because they have to do it to defend the law and to use the courts as a mechanism for upholding existing rights and freedoms. And the third type of litigation that we've really analyzed is strategic support to individual, both criminal and civil cases, where CSOs have really come together to support survivors in taking forward these cases, knowing just how difficult it is for them to access justice for FGM, given all the barriers. And I think here, like, we can really see what kind of an impact such litigation can have. And I'll just give a brief example. The case of Ruth Peel in Liberia, which is one of the case studies which we highlight. So Liberia still does not have a specific law on FGM. And Ruth was kidnapped by the Bondo Society as an adult woman, and she was forcibly subjected to FGM. And she wanted justice, and she tried to approach the justice system with the help and support of Liberian CSOs. And because there's no specific offense on FGM, the only sort of offense that she could go under was under felonious restraint, which is basically a kidnapping related offense because she had been kidnapped and forcibly subjected to this. So even then, it was a really difficult journey through the justice system. Traditional leaders exerted pressure on her to drop, and on the system to drop the charges, and government officials showed little interest in holding perpetrators accountable. Ruth even faced threats, and she and her family had to leave her village for a while and relocate while the process was ongoing. However, with a lot of support from Liberian CSOs, as well as international pressure, the case went through the system, and the court ultimately held the perpetrators liable and imposed prison sentences. And the impact was felt far beyond just this case. The case challenged long-standing taboos around FGM in Liberia, which is a human rights abuse that has been guarded by secrecy and social silence. Ruth's bravery in publicly challenging her forced initiation inspired a lot of others in the country to break the silence on FGM and laid the foundation for increased efforts from national women's rights and human rights organizations to demand an abolition of FGM in the country. It even led to the formation of a national coalition against harmful practices, which is still operating today and is leading sort of the movement against FGM in the country. So this case study really illustrates the difference that the bravery of one woman can make in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. But I think one thing we also looked at in the report is the flip side of strategic litigation cases, especially when they're led by one person or a survivor, as opposed to being a much more systemic case, which involves a lot of people, because that one person is being the face of the case, and is really taking the brunt of, threats, social pressure, intimidation. So one of the things we did as part of the case study is to go back to Ruth and speak to her. It's been 15 years since this case was decided, and to ask her how she felt about, the impact of the case and the fact that she took it forward. And one of the things she said was like, just the personal impact on her has been very critical, and she feels that she's been ostracized from society. She has a lot of difficulties which have been caused to her by the whole legal process. So that's something that we really need to look at to make sure that while strategic litigation cases can have this kind of systemic society-wide impact, they also, at the end of the day, need to work for the woman or the girl who is at the center of the litigation. And then the second part of the report, which maybe I can just briefly go through, is looking at what are the barriers to accessing justice faced by survivors more generally. And for this, with research support facilitated by Thomson Reuters Foundation, we undertook a comparative analysis of 10 countries across the world to look at case laws that they have on FGM, to see how the laws on FGM are actually being implemented, and to determine what the key barriers to access to justice were. And we found that there were many barriers, which I guess would not be surprising to anyone. But these include, for example, just really low reporting of cases, which makes it difficult right at the outset. And this is often due to social pressure, stigma surrounding FGM itself, and the silence which still surrounds this issue in many countries today. And this pressure can go as far as physical threats. For example, we have one case from Kenya in the report, where a 16-year-old girl was again forcibly taken to undergo FGM. And when her father went to try and report it to the police, he was attacked by the group of boys who had taken the girl to try and subject her to FGM. And even though he finally made it and was able to report his case, there are many more cases in which this kind of physical pressure and threats make sure that cases don't even reach the justice system in the first place. And once the case is reported, there are also many barriers which continue. One main one is evidence, and really the difficulty in proving that, firstly, that the FGM has taken place, which can vary depending on the type of FGM. And not a lot of doctors really have the expertise to be able to give strong medical reports. And this is particularly in certain countries, like, for example, in the UK, where they might not have had much experience in dealing with FGM issues, and therefore don't really have the expertise to give reports that can be useful in these cases. And another piece that we found in which has really been a barrier to evidence, is, for example, in one case in Sierra Leone, there was just a misspelling in the medical examination report, where instead of writing clitoridectomy, which is type 1 FGM that's performed, the medical examiner had written clerodectomy. And this is one of the reasons why the case was thrown out of court, saying that, we don't understand this word. And it really shows also, I think, how courts are using really small inconsistencies to dismiss FGM cases, even despite the myriad difficulties that survivors are facing in really getting their cases to court. And this really kind of links to the fact of like who is being prosecuted in the cases that we know of. And one thing we've found is that it's been really very difficult to prosecute cutters themselves, the ones who are actually performing the FGM. And often police say it's because they're not able to identify the exact person who it was who performed it, or there's so much social pressure or active instances of society trying to shield them that it's been difficult to bring cases against them. But this has had like a negative impact also, in the sense that then often the people who are being prosecuted are not the ones who are actually as responsible for what is happening, including those who lend their premises to you for FGM. And very concerningly, we've included evidence in our report from Kenya, which is based on a research which is done by the Clooney Foundation for Justice, which found that survivors of FGM themselves have been prosecuted in Kenya for failing to report cases performed against them, which I think is, yeah, just preposterous. And it goes to show that even while we talk about the need to effectively implement anti-FGM laws and make sure that survivors have access to justice, it's really critical that it's done in a gender-sensitive and survivor-centered way to make sure that we really know who these laws are being used against, and that it's actually, as a whole, helping society instead of harming them and going against the objectives of what we want to try to achieve. And then two other issues very quickly that I already spoke about before is really stigma and the threats and social pressure that we see impacting throughout the justice process, which really makes it difficult to get positive judgments. And I think particularly in threats, this is also linked to the fact that many countries don't have strong victim and witness protection laws in place, or even if they have the laws, in practice, the mechanisms and systems are not there to be able to provide government support to ensure that, you know, the survivors and witnesses can relocate, or they have physical protection throughout the justice process if their lives are being threatened just because for the fact that they've come to the justice system. So yeah, these are some of the really critical barriers to accessing justice that we've identified in our report, and we're hoping that this kind of shed lights on the problem and also prompts governments to fix both the systemic issues as well as make changes to law which are necessary to address these gaps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Divya. And I'm sure as you said, this report comes as an eye opener, very important, talking about litigation and also the barriers faced by survivors to access justice, whereas it should not have happened to them in the first place. So, the importance of having good laws is also equally important as much as community led interventions. Thank you very much, Divya. Now, let us move to the recent Indian Supreme Court judgment reinforcing menstrual hygiene as a fundamental right of women and girls. I invite my dear friend and guide, Debanjana Choudhuri, who's a fierce gender justice activist, to share her insights. Debanjana has supported She and Rights from its inception. Over to you, Debanjana.
Thank you so much, Shobha, and thank you for the speakers who came before me, such wonderful and powerful voices. Thank you for all the insights shared. Yes, it has been a landmark judgment. In fact, it is quite ironical. I'll first start with that the Supreme Court, the highest court of justice in India, had to intervene for menstrual health and dignity and hygiene, which is such a basic as per the right to education in India. So, the Supreme Court, the judgment says that the Supreme Court has emphasized that the meaning of life under Article 21 is not confined to a mere existence, but includes the right to live with dignity, health, self-respect. Now, what does this mean? This means that by recognizing menstrual health and hygiene as an integral part of life under the Article 21, the court acknowledged a reality that has been long affecting girls and women, particularly in silence and neglect, because it stems from patriarchal mindset, stigma, taboo. The recognition is supported by the constitutional mandate of under Article 15.3, which empowers the state to make special provisions for women. By bringing menstruation into constitutional discourse, the Supreme Court of India addressed a long-standing gap between legal guarantees and lived experiences. In 2023 also, the court emphasized the responsibility of the state to ensure that menstrual health is treated not just as a peripheral welfare issue but treated like a matter of fundamental right. We've been hearing the word charity for the last by the last three speakers, and in India too, menstrual health and hygiene has been looked as a charity case instead of fundamental rights. A very sad state of reality. For decades, menstruation has remained a taboo subject with public institutions, especially schools. Even to date, in schools, menstrual health, dignity, hygiene, and usage of menstrual products is not shared openly. There are rarely any segregated toilets at many places, and in many places, in many schools, the girls' toilets are under lock and key. Though there have been some improvements in some states, and there have been several government schemes and policies that have aimed at improving sanitation, however, menstrual hygiene discourse in India has always been under sanitation. It has not been uh, discussed vocally as a fundamental right. This also, for many schoolgirls, this means that the onset of menstruation leads to irregular attendance, inadequate toilet facilities, lack of privacy, unavailability of sanitary products, and fear of embarrassment compel many girl students to remain absent during their menstrual cycle. Needless to say, that this has a huge impact on her life choices, huge impact on her economic freedom and her dignity. What begins as a temporary absence frequently develops into an academic difficulty and, in several cases, results in discontinuation of education. She just simply stops going to school. There have been several data that indicate substantial progress have been made in constructing separate toilets for girls across schools in the country. However, the presence of infrastructure really doesn't guarantee usability. So in many instances, we have found that the toilets are locked, poorly maintained, there is lack of water supply or lack of disposal mechanisms, and absolutely fails to meet the needs of menstruating students. Under such conditions, attending school becomes a daily struggle rather than a guaranteed right. The CSO community in India, various activists have worked under over many years, and they have worked with school authorities, they have worked with state governments, they have worked at the national level. But it is really ironical again that the Supreme Court had to intervene for something that should be a given and a basic, and it has a lifelong impact on adolescent girls. Shobha, in your introduction, you mentioned that nobody should be left behind. Lack of menstrual dignity, hygiene, lack of access to sanitary products, disposal, and the entire cycle of shame and stigma actually leaves many girls behind once they start menstruating. And this avoidance of going to school is not just the physical discomfort that stems from anxiety, but it also stems from social stigma, institutional neglect, and economic constraints that prevent access to menstrual products. Menstrual poverty is another issue that we need to talk about in India. And it exists. Access to menstrual products, information, counseling exists, and the gap is huge. Menstrual poverty operates as a silent killer. It's invisible, but it keeps on reinforcing inequality without being adequately reflected in official statistics. We hardly have any data in India on menstrual poverty. And there have been several instances where girls have compromised their health or abandoned their education due to the absence of basic menstrual support. Recently, last year itself, there was a group of girls in Thane, and it came in popular media. It was reported in a lot of leading newspapers in India that the girls were strip searched after menstrual blood stains were found in a school toilet. And this is exactly the part of the problem. It arises from imagination that the school is not fit for menstrual health, and the girls, they were strip searched. The female teachers, the women teachers, they rebuked the girls because there were menstrual blood stains in the toilet. And this ruling, this particular decision of Supreme Court comes against a background that needs a lot of relevance and needs to be interpreted to include the right to health, dignity, and conditions that make life meaningful. So the court has used words like dignity. It has used words like meaningful. And right now, the decision will continue to remain on paper if it is not implemented to increase access, if it is not implemented to make it meaningful. When girls are forced to sacrifice their education or dignity due to biological realities, the harm is constitutional in nature. And when a society allows this harm to happen, then we fail as a society collectively. If this happens because of stigma, taboo for menstruation, then we have completely failed all the years of advocacy, all the years of activism in India for gender rights. The judgment, interestingly, also recognizes that exclusion arising from menstruation cannot be dismissed as a private inconvenience or personal issue. And this particular statement in the judgment is actually very interesting and needs to be interpreted that the court has understood that under the garb of private inconvenience, like we often see with other reproductive health conversations like FGM, like safe abortion, it is shoved under the carpet. It happens at the hush hush in a room. The court saying that this is not a private inconvenience or personal issue and that it's a public issue makes this decision extremely interesting. It also reinforces the principle of substantive equality. Educational institutions are often considered neutral spaces, but neutrality loses its meaning when there are structural differences and the structural differences are ignored. Failure to address menstrual needs places girls, of course, at a very, very disadvantaged positions and in relation to the boys. By acknowledging this imbalance, the court reaffirmed that the constitutional equality does not mean identical treatment, but requires removal of barriers that prevent equal participation. Equally significant is the emphasis on the state responsibility. In India, health is a state subject, and recognizing menstrual health as a fundamental right imposes a constitutional obligation on the state. Access to sanitary products, functional toilets, clean water, privacy, and safe disposal facilities must form an essential part of the educational system. These are not discretionary welfare measures, but constitutional requirements flowing directly from the right to live with dignity. The judgment also aligns with the constitutional values of privacy and bodily autonomy. Menstruation is a personal experience, but the failure of public institutions is a public humiliation. It exposes students to distress. Respecting bodily autonomy and integrity is the essence of this decision. The recognition also shifts towards a more inclusive and realistic approach. It acknowledges that long-standing silence surrounding menstruation has imposed serious costs on young girls, particularly from those from minorities, particularly from backgrounds from Dalit communities, from tribal communities. The decision also complements India's broader commitments to gender equality. Let's hope that it is translated into reality by the states and by the actors. And the constitutional recognition cannot transform classrooms or schools' infrastructure. The reality of changing classrooms infrastructure, the schools infrastructure, is something that is a part of right to education in India, but as we all know, it is not effective. It is not being translated into action. What we need now, we need continuous monitoring, we need effective execution, we need institutional accountability that are essential to ensure that this right translates into tangible changes. And without adequate resources, training, and oversight, this judgment, like many other judgments, will remain largely symbolic. So there was a question in the chat, like what needs to be done next? There are lots of things that needs to be done next. Fixing sanitation with a menstrual lens, because menstruation is often clubbed with sanitation. So how do you center menstruation? How do you center menstrual health and dignity and hygiene as the main discourse in wash activities and wash projects in India? Second, and basically, I would, in my opinion, one of the major components are how do we make menstrual products public goods and not charity? There has to be emphasis on budgets. India just saw the budget for this particular financial year. There were hardly anything mentioned on reproductive health products. There was nothing on menstrual health products. So we cannot continue to have that. If you're talking about access, you need to make the products available. You need to make the products accessible. So how do we make sure that free or price controlled menstrual products are available in the primary healthcare centers, at the Anganwadis, at the schools, especially for adolescents, persons with disabilities, trans and non-binary menstruators? How do we ensure to do that? How do we make sure that our health systems are capacitated and can support local procurement and women-led production units? How do we reduce cost of a sanitary napkin? How do we reduce cost of a menstrual cup? And this can create a lot of livelihoods and continuity. And of course, choice matters. Choice is the centerpiece of this entire decision. One size does not fit all. It means that rights-based access means informed choice. Not single product can be pushed for convenience. We have often seen in India, in a lot of previous other health measures, one size or one product has been pushed. If it was vasectomy, it was pushed as a public choice and no other choice was available. So like in contraception, we have a basket of choice available. Similarly, for menstrual products, there has to be a basket of choice available. And then, of course, moving into delivery, how do we address disability, gender identity, geographical differences, caste-based differences, Dalit segregation? How do we get data? We need a lot of data. Health systems should collect desegregated data, something that, that we completely lack. We do not know what is happening at the community level. We know that, Anganwadi schools are supposed to do this, but who is going and monitoring whether it is happening? So these are the certain things which need to be done. It's definitely a watershed moment, but it's also very strange when I say this because it's basic healthcare and it should be guaranteed, that the Supreme Court had to intervene to put it under, to basically, put focus that this is Article 21, right to dignity and right to live with dignity, is something, it speaks volumes about how we have failed many generations of girls and women who could not complete their education, who could not access their dreams and their choice and bodily autonomy, because we failed them as a state to provide them with access to menstrual health, dignity, hygiene, information, counseling, the entire gamut. So yeah, it's a long road ahead. It's a state subject, health as usual. We need to see in the coming days how it is being implemented and how products are also going to be implemented. The private sector has a huge role to play as well in the journey for access to menstrual health and hygiene. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debanjana. Thank you for your valuable insights and also insisting upon what I think, that it has always been a subject and matter of shame. It is looked upon as a shameful act or a process, whereas it is a biological process, as you clearly mentioned. And even in the so-called very educated societies, when I've been speaking to women, they say sometimes that discuss is on, oh, we will not go to the temple because we are having our periods. Oh, we will not take part in these activities, some religious activities. Now, this is the sort of mental sickness I think we are growing up with, and we have to get rid of that. And also, the men and the boys should realize that it is a biological process. They need to be uh, part of that initiation and that journey. And yes, it is right that why did the Supreme Court had to intervene for such things? But we are happy that it has intervened, and we now only hope that its implementation takes place as it is hoped. Thank you very much, Devanjana.
Thank you so much, Shobha. One last thing, we often talk
Yes.
about menstruation only in gender conformity.
Right.
And I would really want to emphasize that the
Right.
Supreme Court decision, I wouldn't say judgment, decision talks about living with dignity, which is for all menstruators. So we really need to
Exactly.
understand how do we make access possible, not just for women and girls, but also trans,
Yes.
non-binary individuals who are also going to schools and colleges.
Yes. Yes. Definitely. Definitely, Devanjana. Thank you. Now I invite Ruchi Bhattar, the author of the powerful news report, which is on your screen now. Ruchi is not only a journalist and a strong feminist voice, but also a lawyer. And she writes for ThePrint in India. Welcome, Ruchi. The stage is yours now. Yes,
Hello.
Ruchi?
Hello.
Yes.
I hope I'm audible.
Yes, yes, yes. You're
Uh,
audible and visible both. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for this stage. Thank you so much for inviting me here. This has been a wonderful opportunity for me to learn, firstly, and also share my views. Before me, I think Ms. Debanjana really shared everything so clearly and so scathingly about the Supreme Court, how it had to intervene in something as basic as menstrual right to hygiene. Uh, this is the country, this is the state of affairs we have in India, where the top court has to issue directions to state authorities and to directors of education to make sure that girls don't drop out, because the rate of girls dropping out is such. Data shows, the government data shows, and this is only what is recorded by the government, shows that like approximately 40 lakh girls drop out of primary education in the last 4 years. So the rate of scathing data shows that a top court has to intervene and make this a fundamental right. So I would start. Firstly, the judgment was very well covered by the speaker before me. Thank you so much. I would just emphasize more on the points that stuck out with me. Firstly, we talk a lot about policies being made in India, but the implementation is where we lack. And this has been time and again acknowledged by the top court. This has time and again been acknowledged by the Supreme Court of India. And as lawyers, as litigants, we go to court thinking that, oh, these policies are there, these schemes are there, we need implementation. At the middle level, somebody has made the policy, but it's not going to the person actually responsible to get it. So the Supreme Court tried to bridge that gap by issuing binding directions and making this menstrual hygiene management a fundamental right, so that people who are not having, girls, women, menstruators rather, who are not having these rights can go back to the courts and enforce these rights. So, firstly, it directed all states and union territories to ensure that every school has a functional, gender segregated toilet with usable water and hand washing facilities. Schools must provide free OXO biodegradable sanitary napkins to girl students, accessible through vending machines or designated authorities. Second, it directed schools to establish menstrual hygiene management corners. This is very interesting because this equips the schools with spare uniforms, innerwears, and disposable bags for emergencies. Something which the court had to come up and tell the states to enforce. The institutions must implement safe, environmentally compliant disposable mechanisms and incorporate gender responsive curriculum to break the stigma around puberty and menstruation. Lastly, and most importantly, this has been kept as a part heard matter. So, this is the legal technicality of this is basically that after 3 months, the Supreme Court will hear this matter again, knowing how well this judgment or this decision has been implemented. So the district education officer are mandated to conduct periodic inspections and obtain anonymous feedback from students to ensure that menstrual hygiene is maintained very well and compliance of this judgment has been done. And they're supposed to return back to the Supreme Court within 3 months. So within 3 months, we also get to see the data of how far the implementation of this judgment actually goes. This judgment is basically a 127-page document, which is, I know, a lot. But I would still share this judgment on the chat box here after my turn. And I would urge you all to read and with time and understand the basics of why the Supreme Court felt that even in 2026, we need a judgment, we need a court stamp to say that yes, menstrual hygiene is a fundamental right. Uh, the judges said, and I quote, that we wish to communicate to every girl child who might have become a victim of absenteeism because her body was perceived as a burden, that the fault is not hers. So here, end quote. So here the judges are actually speaking to the society, to the girls reading this judgment, or to whom this judgment actually reaches. And this pronunciation of judgment is not just for the stakeholders, it says, of the legal system. The court has mandated that it is meant for classrooms where girls hesitate to ask for help. It is for teachers who want to help but are restrained due to lack of resources. And it is for the parents who may not realize the impact of their silence, and for the society to establish that progress is measured how we protect the most vulnerable. Most importantly, I think the part of the judgment that stuck out with me is how the court spoke to not just women, but like the women, the people around menstruators, the people that can actually enforce this, which is actually the most important aspect of it. It said that the responsibility of the state is further heightened in case of a child with disability, as the intersection of disability with gender compounds the disadvantage faced during menstruation. So basically, in case of children with disabilities accessing washrooms, it is even more essential that inclusion and for enabling meaningful participation in school. The absence of such accessibility results in exclusion from education and reinforces the social and economic marginalization. So now I think I would also talk about the court talking to the men and the boys who are supposed by the court to break the silence, to break the stigma. Very interestingly, the court, in a section of the judgment, noted that infrastructure alone is half the problem as far as menstrual hygiene is concerned. It emphasized that the role of men and boys, including male teachers and peers, is to sterilize the stigma. Efforts until then would be underutilized, basically calling this a shared responsibility between the men and the boys and the teachers and everybody around a menstruator to break the stigma and breed basic empathy in them and undo the insensitive bits of it. To ensure that these directions do not remain only paper provisions, the court has issued a continuing mandamus. So, what this means that it will continue to monitor this. Like I said before, in the 3 months, we will hear again what is the status report. And ultimately, very importantly, the petitioner who had identified the problem, the petitioner in this case was social worker Dr. Jaya Thakur. She had identified the problem in two folds. Firstly, it being absenteeism, that, and neglect that, women and girls and menstruators, especially with disability, are completely far from gone from the site. And second was them dropping out of school due to lack of menstrual hygiene management. So, while the central government and the states argued that many policies already exist, the court has finally come up and told in a public judgment that what seems to be lacking is effective and consistent implementation. So, in my opinion, and in very popular opinions of circles, of legal circles, we feel that yes, definitely this is a scathing rebuke because it takes Supreme Court to give instructions about implementation. We still are yet to see what the implementations will be like, but we still hope and we still come towards a positive conclusion that at least, we have something to go by, and we have something as fundamental as right to education being debarred by something as basic as menstrual hygiene, and also right to live with dignity is supremely important. And the four pillars of the court's consideration included whether the lack of toilets and absorbance violates right to equality under Article 14 of the Indian Constitution. Secondly, whether the right to dignified menstrual health is part of right to life. And third, whether these deficiencies violate the right to participation and equality of opportunity. And fourth, whether they violate the right to education. In all four of these aspects, the court has ruled that it is very important that now we do consider the right to proper and dignified life as under every girl under the Constitution of India. So with that, I don't want to keep you guys for much, but thank you so much for ensuring that the judgment goes beyond just paper and is discussed within groups like such. And thank you so much for inviting me here. And I'll share the link of my article and the entire judgment on the chat here. I really hope that we can read and we can move forward thinking about how it is important that we still have implementation measures to be kept on, and also keep a note on when the compliance reports come in again of how these implementation measures are actually being implemented in paper, and we get the numbers of those. Thank you Shobha ma'am.
Thank you, Ruchi. All power to you, and thank you. And we need uh, diehards and fighters like you to keep a track on what is actually going to take place on the ground. And let us hope that India sees a stronger response to addressing the issue of menstrual hygiene, grounded in gender equality, gender justice, right to life and privacy, and right to health. And this judgment, as we all feel, and all the speakers have said, that it must extend beyond schools and urban areas to reach every person who menstruates, including persons with disabilities, trans men, and other marginalized communities, and also particularly those living in rural and underserved areas. So
Yes,
let
yes,
us hope for,
exactly.
yes, yes,
Yes, exactly. I would just like to add that yes, while we discuss this judgment in circles like these, sitting in our rooms in front of laptops, we really also hope that we take this judgment forward, we take this decision forward to the rural hearts of India,
yes,
where women, girls, menstruators don't really have access to Supreme Court judgments. So it
yes.
is upon us to take this ruling forward to bring it from the Supreme Court to the rural heart of the India. Thank you.
Right. Yes, very right, Ruchi, because particularly in the case of women and marginalized communities, we know first thing is a good law is important. Its implementation is equally important, more important, and also the knowledge of the law for whom towards whom it is directed. That is also very important. Very often, women and other gender diverse people, they are unaware of the laws which exist, and unless we know that there is a law, how can we fight for our rights? I think
Absolutely.
that, yes,
Absolutely.
yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker was to be Ruchika Jaggi, who leads an inspiring community-led responses to menstrual hygiene. But I just got a call from her that her 95 years old father has slipped in the house, and so she will be unable to come. So now I invite Subrat Mohanty, who is on the board of Stop TB Partnership and also coordinates health programs in India for Humana People to People India. Before he speaks, let us see a short documentary film on the work done by his team at Humana People to People India. And then Subrat has some time, I think a 5 minutes period, to speak about his teamwork. So let us see that documentary first.
Breast cancer remains one of the leading health challenges for women. Yet early detection can save lives. Lack of awareness, fear, and social stigma often delay diagnosis, especially in rural and underserved communities. Humana People to People India, in collaboration with state and district health authorities in Deoria district Uttar Pradesh and Ballari district Karnataka, is implementing the Swasthya Setu breast cancer awareness and screening project. Across communities, women are being informed, trained and encouraged to take charge of their own health. With the support of frontline health workers, awareness is reaching homes, breaking myths and promoting regular self-screening. This film highlights the importance of awareness for breast self-examination and early detection. Because when breast cancer is identified early, treatment is possible and lives can be saved. In just 3 months, over 90,000 women learned how to examine themselves through street plays, rallies, miking drives, and thousands of conversations across lanes and courtyards.
ब्रेस्ट कैंसर एक बहुत ही गंभीर बीमारी है जो मतलब लास्ट में पता चलता है तो इंसान की जान भी जा सकती है। और इस प्रोग्राम के थ्रू महिलाओं को पहले जागरूक किया जा रहा है, उन्हें पहले पता चल जाएगा। अगर थोड़ा भी लक्षण उनमें आएगा तो उसको पहले पता चल जाएगा और ट्रीटमेंट समय पे मिल जाएगा जिससे उसकी जान बच सकती है। ये फर्स्ट स्टेज में अगर पता चल जाए तो जान मतलब बच जाती है पेशेंट की। और वही पहले नहीं पता था, जब एकदम लास्ट स्टेज पे आ जाता था, उसके लक्षण आते थे, तब पता चलता था कि इनको ब्रेस्ट कैंसर है, जैसे उनकी जान भी जा सकती थी। और हुआ भी है, इस गांव में कई मतलब ऐसा केस देखा भी गया है। लेकिन इस प्रोग्राम के चलने से महिलाएं जागरूक हो गई हैं, उन्हें थोड़ा सा भी कोई दिक्कत होता है तो वो अपना देख लेती है और हमारे पास भी आती हैं कि इसका उपाय बताइए क्या करना है।
आशा कार्यकर्ताओं को साथ में लेकर हमने चलने का प्रयास किया है और 1000 आशा कार्यकर्ताएं जो इन दोनों जिलों में हमारे साथ काम कर रही है। स्वास्थ्य सेतु परियोजना की पूरी टीम, जिसमें कम्युनिटी मोबिलाइजर्स, डेटा कोऑर्डिनेटर्स और एक बड़ी टीम है जो स्वास्थ्य विभाग के साथ में मिलकर काम कर रही है। और हमने मेडिकल कॉलेज और विभाग की टीम के विशेषज्ञों के साथ में मिलकर ट्रेनिंग मॉड्यूल बनाया और प्रशिक्षकों के माध्यम से हमने 1000 आशा बहनों को प्रशिक्षित किया है।
Breast self-examination is a simple, cost-effective practice that empowers women to recognize early warning signs and seek timely care.
इस ट्रेनिंग से हमको बहुत कुछ सीखने को मिली है। कैंसर के लक्षण पहचानने को बताया गया है, सिखाया गया है और कैंसर के कारण भी बताए गए हैं इसमें और उसका उपचार भी बताया गया है। हम अपने फील्ड में इसको अच्छी तरह से बता सकते हैं, महिलाओं को समझा सकते हैं कि कैंसर कैसे होगा, उसके क्या बचाव है, क्या लक्षण है, क्या कारण है, ये हमको बताया गया है।
Behind every screened woman stands a trained ASHA, an ANM, and a health team empowered with knowledge. Their confidence has grown, and so has their impact.
आज भी ट्रेनिंग के दौरान कैंसर के बारे में बहुत सारी जानकारियां मैं हासिल हुई। इससे क्या होगा कि जब हम अपने क्षेत्र में जाएंगे तो वहाँ पे महिलाएं जितनी भी आती हैं और लड़कियां आती हैं, उनको हम कैंसर के बारे में जागरूक कर सकते हैं। इसमें जो सबसे ज्यादा फैलने वाला कैंसर है ब्रेस्ट कैंसर, इसी के बारे में आज हम लोग को ट्रेनिंग दी गई है। तो हम लोग जब क्षेत्र में जाएंगे, हमारे पास जितनी भी लड़कियां आएंगी, औरतें आएंगी, उनसे बातचीत करके उनको हम इसका लक्षण बताएंगे, कारण बताएंगे। इससे क्या होगा, उनको अपने अगर अंदर कैंसर के थोड़े भी लक्षण दिख रहे हैं तो घर पे जाके खुद एग्जामिन करके और आके अगर हमें बताती हैं तो जांच करने में आसानी मिलेगी।
Swasthya Setu is more than awareness. It's dignity, courage, and the power of women standing together. We are building a future where no woman fears speaking about her health, and every woman catches the signs on time.
Yes, Subrat. Welcome
thank
now.
you. Thank you, Sobha. Sobha, for two reasons, I would like to thank you because it's an opportunity for giving to us to speak here. And secondly, I feel so privileged that I'm among some of the brilliant women who is in the panel also. I'm the only male in the group, but that's a real privilege. No, but nothing much to add, Sobha, because you all have seen the a very short film. So this is basically the subject is little bit away from FGM, but it is around the women, it is around the gender, it is around everything around health for a female. And you see in India, in the context of the village, this project Swasth Setu being implemented by Humana People to People India. We worked in, we piloted this project in one district in Deoria, Uttar Pradesh, and one in Ballari, Karnataka. So what I have seen, the women, basically the female in the community, they woke up before sunrise. They prepared their meals, care for children and elders, work in fields or homes, and ended their day exhausted, but yet resilient. Their own health, they hardly forget. Silence is something which was learned very early and practiced daily. This is a kind of routine scenario in the context of the village women. And I heard everyone talking about the women health and everything. In particular, illness and also especially cancer was spoken of in hushed tones, if at all. For many women, the breast cancer was not a medical condition, but a sentence actually. Many of the previous speaker talked about law and everything. So for the women, it's like talking about cancer is like a sentence because it is associated with suffering, loss, and inevitability. Few of them, when we implemented the project, started this project, few of them actually heard about breast self-examination. Even when I started talking to some of the women, even our community mobilizer in our project office, when I start talking about the breast examination, and they were like looking at me, how come I'm talking something which is not at all accepted in the community, in the society, talking about the breast. But slowly, they understand that this is not about something which should be broken, which cannot be like a taboo or myth in the society. So everything actually began when we implemented this project. We went to the community and we trained the ASA worker. So ASA became our catalyst. They are our agent for this all change. So they moved around with our community mobilizer, and they started talking about the women health. It's not about only breast, but talking about the health. It's such a beautiful body you have, and why not you also say that, yes, I have a wonderful body, beautiful body to talk about. And then ASA and the community manager, they sensitized them, made them aware about all about body, the why the breast cancer is so important, why so many women in India are dying of breast cancer. And when they understood the point, the female in the community, they started self-examination of breast. And around that time also, we had organized several kind of community mobilization activities, Nukkad Natak, street plays, shows, and awareness rallies kind of thing. So it also helped side by side with the community focused and also the families. So by doing all these activities, we actually empower the female, provided them access, and this access is about information, the access to knowledge and also practices. So by end of the 1 year period, 235,000, 235,000 female were screened, means basically self-screening. And out of 235,000 women, 453 were identified with some symptom, lumps and other things. Interesting part of the entire project was out of 453 women identified, 400 of them were referred for the treatment, for the diagnosis. And out of 400, 21 diagnosed as breast cancer, and 15 of them have started treatment. So the number is small. Of course, the breast cancer number is small in the national program also. But question is that the number screened is very high. In 1 year time, normally the national program talk about 40 to 50,000. The referral, look at the referral. Out of 453, 400 referred. And that's because of only ASA worker and also the community mobilizer. They followed the person who are identified with some symptoms to the diagnosis point, ensuring that all of them reached out to the public health facility or private health, and they get the proper diagnosis. And 21 out of them are identified as having some breast cancer, and 15 of them are treatment. So it's really a great figure. The number talks one thing, but otherwise the social part of the entire project was building trust with the community, trust with the ASA, and then now we have created a scenario in the community, in the districts, that women are not talking about their own health, which was actually important. The women, they know that where to go if they have some symptoms, and at the same time, the health program, they have also geared up to support this kind of initiative. So in a nutshell, Shobha, I would say that although it's a 1 year project, it's a kind of a small intervention, but it has really given some kind of exemplary results to talk about women health, breast cancer, and empowering the women. So I stop over here, Shobha. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity.
Thank you, Subrat. And I don't think it is out of place to talk about breast cancer and also a little bit about cervical cancer today. Only 2 days ago, we have observed the World Cancer Day. And breast cancer and cervical cancers are two cancers which really affect the women and some other gender diverse people more. And so cancer is a non-communicable disease, and governments have committed to reduce NCDs by 33% by 2030. And I'm reminded of how the US government torpedoed the political declaration on NCDs like cancers at the UN General Assembly last year. And US government objected against right to safe abortion, and it unabashedly took a position against gender equality. Abortion was not mentioned in the NCD political declaration, and that is another matter of detail. But as health justice advocates, we would like to reinforce our stand that right to safe abortion and all sexual and reproductive health and rights and justice services and broader gender equality is essential if we are to advance towards reducing NCDs, including cancers, by 33% by 2030. And if we talk of breast cancer, then and rather breast cancer screening, all women, men, and other gender diverse people who have taken a mammography test for breast cancer screening know how an awfully painful and inhuman experience it is. Breast self examination is important, but it has its own limitations. And scientifically speaking, there are other user friendly and point of care screening tools that can be used. In fact, we have a comment in the chat box from Noi Srinafa from Thailand that breast cancer self examination is fine, but we should avoid shifting the onus on an individual. We need to use FDA and Indian and other regulatory evidence based tools to help women and girls and other gender diverse people to screen breast cancer much better in terms of scientific sensitivity and specificity, which in privacy and with non-invasive tools. Governments must roll these out. Also, for cervical cancer, we know it is a vaccine preventable cancer, and molecular diagnostic tests of cervical cancer are increasingly becoming available. Point of care molecular testing platforms like TrueNat that have multi disease testing capabilities are generally used mostly for TB diagnosis, but they can be a game changer if used for cervical cancer testing too. Currently, in many countries, including India, we use visual inspection by acetic acid or pap smear tests for cervical cancer screening, which are not only inferior tests but are also not user friendly. Why not use the WHO and government recommended molecular tests for cervical cancer screening? They already exist at point of care states in most low and middle income countries. More importantly, governments have promised to be ready by 2030 so that they can end cervical cancer by the end of 2100. Why wait for another century when we have the HPV vaccine against cervical cancer right now? Vaccines made in global south like India are also there. Molecular tests made in global south or India are also there. Why do we have to wait that long for another century to end it? So I think it is important to use these new diagnostic tools which are more user friendly, which are already there. But they will not succeed if they just sit on the shelf. They have to reach the communities and people for whom they are made. So now we open for question and answer session. Please type in your questions, comments and reflections in the chat box. We already have a lot of questions and some of them have been answered also by the speakers. But I would request the speakers to please speak out the answers because this session is also being streamed live on YouTube. So for the benefit of everyone to listen to the responses is important. I will just read out the questions and the speaker who has already responded, I would request her to please say that again so that we can hear the response. So, Irfan Ali Khokar from Pakistan says that the Indian Supreme Court's ruling is historic. My question is how can civil society and health systems translate this legal recognition into real access, such as affordable menstrual products, safe sanitation, and dignity in schools, especially for rural and marginalized communities? I think our speakers have delved upon this, but if anybody would like to add something, Debanjana or Ruchi or Safiya, anybody, please be welcome to speak.
Thank you so much, Irfan, for the question, and thanks, Shobha. Ruchi, please feel free to add as well. So, coming again, bringing a CSO lens, we often see that decisions, like Ruchi has mentioned, after 3 months, again, an assessment will take place. And this is basically testing waters. And CSOs can play their part, but they cannot play a major part. It has to be by the state. And when I say state, I don't literally mean states like, Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, and states and union territories. I mean government actors who have the maximum budgets, who have the maximum access, and who are responsible for primary healthcare centers, for training of frontline workers like Ashas, Anganwadis. Us, as civil society, we have been playing our part. Even this particular petition was done by a civil society activist. So we have been playing our part. Now it is the government's job to ensure that yes, school toilets are segregated, products are available, if not free, at an absolutely subsidized way. Ideally, it should be free because there are lots of medicines that are given free at PHCs. Why not menstrual health products? And it should be a basket of choice. I would again like to reiterate, don't just push sanitary napkins and pads. Give them the choice. Give them the choice like it is given in contraception. One size does not fit all. And the other thing, in these 3 months, it's important to understand sensitization. Will the male teachers and the boys be trained, be counseled during these 3 months? Will they be told how to behave or how to talk about menstruation? How to not dehumanize something that is so biological? This sensitivity, the sensitization cannot happen in 3 months. Yes, infrastructural changes can be mapped in 3 months. Behavioral changes cannot be mapped in 3 months. But the onus definitely lies at the state. They have the budgets, they have the access. We can bring in, like Mr. Mohanty showed in India, like Humana, like there are lots of other organizations. We can bring in our part, but the amplification needs to happen at the ground level, at the rural, urban, semi-urban, all peripheral levels, and it has to be equal, it has to be inclusive. So what a school in a Dalit community is getting as an information should be equal as a school in Delhi getting that information. So yeah, I stop at that and I pass it over to Ruchi.
Yes, Ruchi.
Yes, just a small
Yeah.
addition, like what
Yes.
Manjana ma'am said, completely makes sense. And like, there is a push. We need to like, be more implementative towards it. But also I feel like something that is very powerfully doing the rounds is how these biodegradable, like I have seen, and I plan to even like take this forward, is how these biodegradable sanitary napkin makers, such like companies which are focused on making biodegradable sanitary napkins or biodegradable sanitary products per se, are now thinking of maybe ramping it up with the government or having a partnership with the government, so that a their products of course get more highlighted, b the greater good is solved. And the government also, like, I hope, but it's still not confirmed, is thinking of tying up with such, like, it is already happening, but like in states where massive production is needed, massive production of sanitary products are needed, such NGOs, such companies which make these biodegradable products are like moving at a faster pace now. And also, I think ma'am very rightly pointed out, it lies within the actors now to take it to the rural women. So as a social activist, I would say I am trying also in ways to like maybe using social media, or whenever I have ways to go out to meet those women, I try to do that as well. And this is how I feel like all of us can maybe in some way or the other, by connecting with our rural NGOs, or by connecting with our nearby social activists, further the cause of what actually has been pronounced in doing all this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruchi. There is a question on by Irfan on beyond awareness. What are the most effective community-led strategies that have
Yeah.
proven to reduce FGM in practice, especially strategies that protect girls without creating backlash or pushing the practice underground? Safiya, I think you had answered the question, but could you please say that again?
Yes, Shobha, I can.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
from based on global evidence, which has been tested, we know that health education, mobilizing communities, and really having dialogues with communities, that is led by community members themselves, media sensitization done in a very sensitive way, and training healthcare providers have been proven strategies, right? In Asia, while this is not tested, but we know from based on what we're seeing that public declarations by medical bodies, ministries of health, national children's commissions, and state bodies condemning medicalization, but also condemning the practice, goes a long way in really ending the practice, because ultimately the onus of responsibility should also not lie on the women themselves, right? So the state needs to take more action, and state regulatory bodies need to take more action in moving forward. And also, dialogues and safe spaces for meaningful discussion on this goes a long way in really supporting and bringing up this conversation, especially things, activities that are done by groups like Sahio in India, for example. They have a program called ThePrint Charcha, where they bring in community members and they have a discussion around this and a sensitization, but also to kind of create more awareness with women themselves. Because I think in Asia, the interesting thing is that yes, we need to move beyond awareness to social norm change, but there is also a lot of women who don't know that this has been done. So we also, I think in Asia, because it's a broad area, right? So we can't use the same brush to talk about it. So in places like Indonesia and Malaysia, the context might be different to places like Sri Lanka and Indonesia. Sri Lanka and India. And also engaging and getting the support of local traditional and religious leaders plays a big role, especially in communities where this has been tied, unfortunately, to religion and so on. So, and I think we also need to think beyond criminalizing communities because, like Divya has comprehensively spoken about, there's a lot of strategic litigation avenues that we can go down, right? But we also need to move towards working with communities to hold those practicing accountable, but not criminalize them, because that's an important distinction that we need to make. Because who are we going to criminalize, right? Are we going to criminalize the parents? Are we going to criminalize grandmothers? Are we going to criminalize? So that's a very, very dodgy topic. And I think that that balance needs to be taken very carefully. And also sensitive reporting. Sensitive reporting goes a long way on this to not sensationalize the message, but to work with survivors in getting their voices amplified. That's very, very important because we need to understand the implications of this more, to kind of really push back on that narrative that this is a minimal thing that's happening in Asia and that this is not severe, you know. So we need to really amplify survivor voices so that we increase visibility.
Thank
Thanks,
you. Thank
Shobha.
you. Thank you. Divya, would you like to add something?
No, not really. I think
Okay.
Safia's
Okay.
highlighted it pretty
Okay.
well. Maybe the only
Okay.
thing I would add is like, yeah, just the importance of having laws and policies which are addressing this issue so that we can have a
Right.
base in which all the other systemic interventions are
Right.
also working. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And then there's a question from Soumya Gupta and also from Irfan that if UPR mechanism is helping or not in eliminating FGM. And also, is anti-right pushbacks impacting efforts to end FGM? Why has it risen in the last 8 years instead of the promise to reduce it or to end it by 2030? Any of the panelists, if you want to answer, please.
Maybe I can come
Yes,
in. I think we
yes,
have found the UPR mechanism to be helpful, particularly like in South and Southeast Asia, because like governments are not really prioritizing the issue right now. So any instance in which it's brought up kind of in a bilateral mechanism and given importance as a human rights issue that the region has to be paying attention to, I think it's useful. Like I gave an example of India, which received a recommendation in the UPR. The government didn't accept the recommendation, but we still feel like it was important in at least keeping the issue on the conversation. And with respect to the anti-rights backlash, I think yes, unfortunately, I think we've seen a lot in the last couple of years, the anti-rights backlash affecting gender equality generally, and it's definitely coming for FGM as well. And there have been a number of instances like in the Gambia, where the law was firstly challenged, and there was an effort made by in Parliament to repeal the existing law on FGM, and when that failed, they've kind of approached the Supreme Court challenging the same law. In the US, also, I think there are like a different aspect of the anti-rights backlash, which is the government trying to really misuse existing anti-FGM laws, which are there in the US, to then use them to attack like the trans community and to criminalize the gender affirming care, which is being offered to minors under 18. So there are like many different examples where we're seeing the anti-rights backlash.
okay, thank you. There's a question from Zafar Kidwai that what needs to change to move towards ending FGM instead of letting it rise as it has risen in the last 8 years. I think, Safiya, you had responded to this, but again, maybe have the response again, please.
Yes, Shobha, just give me one
Yes,
second. I'm trying to
yes,
think
yes,
of one.
yes,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, I think similar to what previously everybody has expressed also is that one, we need to stop minimizing FGMC as we're seeing it in Asia. I'm speaking from an Asian perspective
Yes.
here. The context is different, of course, globally. But we need to stop minimizing it. Yes, it's different, and we need to have contextual awareness, and any kind of effort needs to be contextually grounded. That is important. But we need to stop framing and minimizing this. That's the key thing. Any type of FGMC is a violation and is a form of gender-based violence, is the framing that we are taking. So this whole pandering and this kind of back and forth ball passing is just, it doesn't help. It really kind of sustains the practice, and what we're seeing is that it perpetuates the continuation of it. So that's one. And there needs to be more efforts and commitments both nationally and regionally to support and call to an end to medicalization in particular. Because that is something that is very concerning, especially when it starts to get regulated, right? And more work needs to be done, like I said previously, on social norm change that's informed by community members and survivors, and more engagement and support from religious and traditional leaders, but also very importantly, more investment on Asian-led evidence and data, because this whole question also comes up as to who's telling our stories, who's informing the strategies that we're using. So that needs, especially when it comes to interventions that we're kind of rolling out in Asia, that needs to be informed by Asian voices. So that is where I think the network members and when the network comes into play is that is very vital, and there needs to be more investment channeled into that and more regional solidarity really towards this, first acknowledging the practice, but also calling an end to it categorically.
Yeah, thank you, Safiya. And I think that applies not only to Asia, what you have said, but over general, all regions where this practice is in existence. There's a question from Soumya Gupta for Subrat. Soumya says that the intention was powerful, reaching to almost 300,000 women and girls. Do you plan to include breast self-exam plus other tools that are science and evidence-based and very highly sensitive and specific for cancer screening? And would you be expanding the population from women to others at risk too, even if that risk is lower, like men and transgender people and other genders? Yes,
Thank
Subrat.
you, thank you, thank you, Soumya, for the question, and it's a great question. Uh, no, Soumya, we are basically the 1 year project was kind of pilot project around the self-examination of breast among the 18 years of women, 18 and above. So we in the first page we only uh, we have included only the female, not the other categories, but we have not excluded them. But I do not think in the 235,000 women were screened, there were any kind of transgender or other communities. Agree with you, Somaya, that uh, some of the men actually they came to us very late, saying that few of them, very small number, they came to our community mobilizer and said that they all had witnessed some kind of problem, but that again was very insignificant to talk here. Uh, the technology part, no, Somya, in the project, actually the project was on the self-screening. So we practiced only the self-screening of breast. But what we did was we actually linked them to the diagnosis services, which was available in the public health facilities. I also looked at one of the question about mammography, but in the places where we worked in Devria and Ballari, which are more of rural districts, the mammography services were not available. So they go for the for other diagnosis services and link to the treatment facilities available in the bigger tertiary hospital. So that is the scenario, but we are looking forward to scale it up in a bigger way. Uh, all depends on the possibility of resources and everything. And we definitely include your suggestion, Soumya, that how we can also be more inclusive in terms of screening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. There is a comment from OME that men and religious leaders also need to be involved in the efforts of eradicating FGM. So I'm sure, of course, the speakers would agree with that. And I'm sorry we have already exceeded the time by over 20 minutes. Thank you for a very, very lively discussion. And with this, we come to the close of today's session. My gratitude to speakers for their thoughtful presentations and for actually firing up this discussion once again, and to the listeners for their attention. Let us not forget that female genital mutilation and cutting reflects deep-rooted gender inequality and constitutes an extreme form of discrimination against girls and women. And so does the lack of menstrual hygiene and the silence around this in many countries, including our own in India. So there is no medical justification for female genital mutilation, and it is a gross human rights violation. We must use the best scientific tools that are out there to diagnose and treat cancers like breast and cervical cancer and avoid unnecessary suffering. We have to rethink, rebuild, and rise as we continue on our arduous journey for gender equality. Goodbye and namaste till we meet again next month.
Thank you, Shobha. Thank you so much, and namaste.
Namaste.